Hmm. Hi, everyone. So we're going to look at chapter 16 today, looking at social psychology. We'll define it. We'll talk about some of the big concepts like attribution theory, the fundamental attribution error, social influence, groups and decision making, social cognition, and then we'll end with helping behaviors. And this topic, the topic of social psych, is really as broad as psychology goes. So if you like social psychology, you might like sociology. If you like sociology, you might like social psychology. This is the scientific study of the ways in which the thoughts, feelings, and behaviors of one person are influenced by the real, imagined, or inferred behavior of other people. So we're looking at the intersections here of how other people influence us and might shape our behaviors, our thoughts, and our feelings. Lots and lots of topics within this perspective or this topic, but we'll look at some of just the big ones as we get into our last chapter. So one of the big names in social psychology is a man named Fritz Heider. And Heider is credited with something called attribution theory. This theory suggests that we have a tendency to give causal explanations for someone else's behavior, either due to crediting the situation or crediting the person's disposition. So from this perspective, we're looking at, is it somebody's personality that explains why they did something? Or is it more the result of situational factors? And interestingly, we tend to kind of go a little bit different direction depending on the situation and the person. What we tend to do is commit an error called the fundamental attribution error. It's a tendency that we have as people to overestimate the impact of personal disposition and underestimate the impact of the situations, especially when we're looking at the behavior of other people. And again, this is the fundamental attribution error. So we overemphasize personal causes for other people's behavior and underemphasize the personal causes for our own. So for example, we see Joe is quiet, shy, and introverted most of the time, but with friends, he's very talkative, loud, and extroverted. And so we're going to overestimate the impact of disposition and underestimate the impact of the situation. The situation tends to have some really strong influences, which is one of the big tenets of social psychology. And so we tend to commit this error a good amount of the time. One of the big topics in this chapter is that of social influence, the process by which others individually or collectively affect our perceptions, attitudes, and actions, right? So what we're going to look at is the presence or actions of other people can really have a very strong impact on our attitudes and actions. And one of the ways that we see this play out quite a bit is in norms and social and cultural influences. We all have different cultures that we belong to, whether it's our family, our friends, an ethnicity, a race, a gender, lots and lots of different cultures. And every culture has what we can call norms. They influence us in quite a few ways. They might seem really obvious or blatant, or they might be a little bit more subtle. But norms are shared ideas or expectations about how we're supposed to behave. Really, really easy one. In a classroom, when you're sitting in a class, you're expected to sit at your desk and face forward. If somebody got up and stood in the back of the room, that would be really, really awkward, right? Everyone would stare at them wondering what was going on. In an elevator, it's a very similar concept. You get in the elevator, you push the button, and you stare forward quietly, right? If you were to turn around, everybody would wonder what was going on. It would make people uncomfortable. Other norms, there are norms about the ways that we dress. There are norms about personal hygiene and showering. There are norms for everything. And when we break those norms, we tend to get a lot of attention. We're kind of punished in a way for deviating. And that can be very subtle, or it can be something that's very, very blatant. You notice these norms the most, I think, when you travel outside of the country. If you go somewhere else, you can see how the norms are very different from culture to culture and also from country to country. One other thing that we see with social influence is the idea of conformity. We tend to conform or adjust our behavior to coincide with a group standard, even at the expense of our preferences sometimes. And one of the very famous studies related to this was done by a psychologist named Solomon Asch, who studied conformity in lines. And it was something really, really basic, right, where he had lines of a different length And he would ask people to vote on which ones were the same. And if other people voted for an option, then what he found is people would go along with the group standard, go along with the norm, even if they knew better, right? And if you look in the lecture file that I've created for you on Canvas, you can watch this video, and there's a little bit more about it in the textbook. But this was a very famous example of conformity, just for something as simple as a couple of other people are going along with the idea. We also see compliance and obedience as two other ways that social influence can play out. Compliance is when we have a change of behavior in response to an explicit request, right? And there are some techniques that we can use to induce compliance. The foot in the door in the face, and the lowball procedure. All of these things are little tricks that we can use in order to get people to go along with something that you want, if you are smart about it. You got to know which one to use for the situation and also for the person that you're trying to influence. So the foot in the door effect is once people have gotten their foot in the door, they're likely to be able to get the whole door to open. Once you get a small request granted, people are likely to comply with a larger one. So for example, if you borrow $5 from somebody, then they're likely to give you 10 or 20 or more. Now, probably assuming that you pay them back, but if you can get people to give you a small request, they're likely to give you more and more. This works really well with people who have a hard time saying no. The door in the face effect is the opposite. This is when somebody slams the door in your face, they're going to be more likely to open it next time. So let's say you start with a really big request and they say no, they're going to be more likely to say yes to a smaller request in the future. So if you know that your request is probably going to be met with a no, start with something bigger, and this will work well for people who tend to feel guilty or want to make you happy. The lowball procedure is another way that this can kind of pop up. The first step is to get somebody to agree to something, and then you slowly increase the cost of compliance. They do this a lot at car dealerships. In fact, all of these things can kind of come up if you're buying or leasing a car, which is why I have a picture of that right here. But what they do is they get you to agree to an amount, and then they slowly add. They add insurance, they add, this thing and that thing, and then the taxes. Oh, and don't forget this. And because you've already said yes and you're already committed and you've already spent all this time, right, you're less likely to walk away. So that's the lowball procedure. So again, the key is to know which one to use for the situation and the person at hand. I tend to have good luck with the door in the face effect, right? But it totally depends on the person and the request. Obedience, on the other hand, is when you change your behavior in response to a command from an authority figure. This could be a professor, it could be a researcher, it could be someone who's in a position of power. And a really famous example of this was Stanley Milgram's obedience experiment, where he instructed people to think they were delivering electric shocks, and they would do it even if it violated their own principles. And most frequently, it was because they saw themselves as the agent of somebody else's will, right? That they weren't responsible for their own actions because somebody else in charge told them what to do. Or they failed to perceive the situation accurately. They just didn't feel like they had any responsibility, or like, oh, well, they know what they're doing. They know, and they told me what to do, so I did it. Again, make sure you read through the lecture and the textbook for a little bit more about Milgram's famous experiment on obedience. Another big area of social psychology has to do with groups and decision making, right? We tend to leave a lot of decisions in our culture up to groups. We tend to turn to groups a lot, right? We have a lot of like group dynamics and behavior, but there are some interesting things that can happen when we leave a decision up to groups. One of them is called the risky shift. There's a greater willingness of a group rather than an individual to take risks. Think about like groups and mob behavior. Like you probably wouldn't go out and loot at Target, but if everybody was doing it, would you? Right? It's because oftentimes people tend to have this diffusion of responsibility. If everybody's doing it, then you feel like you can take a bigger risk. So we have this risky shift phenomenon that can happen. We also have something called groupthink, where we tend to get this desire for harmony that might override realistic appraisals of alternatives. So people tend to want everything to be happy and go along and everyone to agree. And so they might not make the best decisions because they're more worried about harmony than they are about like a realistic appraisal. We also see that people have what's called de-individuation, a loss of personal sense of responsibility in a group. If you've ever read the book Lord of the Flies or seen the movie Lord of the Flies, great examples of that in there, right? As we see like that loss of responsibility, people don't feel like they're held as accountable for their behavior, kind of similar to the idea of the risky shift. A few other things in this chapter, we look a lot at social relations, right? And social cognition. A couple of things that we see here, the primacy effect and stereotypes. Everybody tends to have like these whole first impressions, right? And if you've ever heard someone say that first impressions matter, they're correct, right? That early information that we learn about someone or take in about someone tends to weigh heavier than later information. It tends to really heavily influence our impression of that person. And so do stereotypes, right? We tend to stereotype a lot. It's a shortcut that our brain takes in order to help us out. And sometimes stereotypes are right. Other times, stereotypes can be completely incorrect and lead to issues, which we'll get to on the next slide. But stereotypes are really common, right? So somebody is wearing all black, so they must be emo or they must be punk. Somebody is Asian, so they must like math, like we have on here. I'm punk, so I must be rebel, right? There's all these things that we tend to like infer, and it's a shortcut that our brain takes in order to save us a little bit of time. Nothing wrong with stereotypes as long as you don't let them lead you to things like prejudice, discrimination, and racism, right? When you take shortcuts, sometimes it can lead to these things if you don't have that awareness or challenge it. Prejudice is an unfair, intolerant, or unfavorable attitude toward a group of people. It's a negative thought that you have toward a group, like hatred, fear, dislike toward a group of people. Discrimination is an unfair series of acts taken toward an entire group of people or individual members of that group. Sorry, my daughter kept walking in and out, so I paused it for a minute. But discrimination is that unfair series of acts taken toward an entire group of people, right? And this can very easily lead to things like racism. It can be like a really big issue when you treat a whole group of people the same way, not recognizing that they're individuals, kind of giving into those stereotypes on like a darker level. Racism is prejudice and discrimination directed at a particular group. We can also have ageism, we could have genderism, we could have sexism, right? Any kind of ism is a prejudice and discrimination combined at a particular group. And this is something that we study a lot as social psychologists who are trying to understand and challenge and then reverse these things when possible. Okay. There are some things you can do to reduce prejudice and discrimination. I have a couple of them here, right? Recategorization is a big one. We tend to have these stereotypes and we put people into these categories based on those stereotypes. So hanging out with people who are different from you and broadening your horizons and having improved group contact with people who are different can be a wonderful way to challenge them. Kind of a couple of cool movies related to that. The newer Jumanji movies where you have people who are like kind of nerdy versus kind of jocks versus popular, right? And then the old Breakfast Club movie, right? Where you hang out with people who are really different from you, it challenges those stereotypes. You get to know people as individuals rather than knowing them for the stereotypical roles that they might play. Also, the idea of like the just world phenomenon. This is another one that we often see, that there's justice in the world, right, being something that we tend to believe when we have privilege. So privilege tends to correlate with prejudice and discrimination. So just being aware and mindful of this tendency that we have as people can go a long way to helping us to reduce it. One kind of last area of topic here is helping behaviors, right? Altruism and then the bystander effect. So kind of the good side of helping and then the bad side of helping. Altruism is when we help others and it has nothing to do with any kind of personal gain. It's when we have this unselfish regard for the welfare of others. So we help out and do things in a very like altruistic, kind sort of way. Altruism is a wonderful thing to practice when you can. Can you imagine if we all just did one random act of kindness a day, what a wonderful world it would be? Unfortunately, though, we do also have a tendency as people to have what's called the bystander effect, that we have a tendency to not help, especially as the number of people present increases. So if somebody is, for example, like laying in the street, if lots of people are present, we have a tendency to keep going and not help. think how many times you drive by somebody on the side of the road that looks like they're broken down or could use help, but you don't stop. And we sometimes don't stop for our own safety because we're busy, because we don't feel like we can help. But it is an interesting tendency that we have where even though we notice that somebody might need help, if there are other people around, we tend to diffuse that responsibility. So you obviously want to take care of your own safety and be really mindful of your own like safety in situations, but just be aware that this is a tendency that we have. If you see somebody who is upset or struggling or needs help and you feel safe helping, stop for a moment and check, because the more people that are present, the less likely we are to help them out. So obviously there are quite a few other topics in social psychology, but those are some of the kind of big ones to cover. This was our last chapter in the textbook, right, of the semester and of our class. So make sure that you do read the chapter in the ebook, as always, to get all that depth of information. Don't forget to also look through the lecture on Canvas. Especially here, there's a couple of experiments that we talked about that I go into a little more depth about in the book and in the lecture. And of course, thank you so much for all of your time and energy over the course of our class, right? Have a wonderful rest of your week. And I won't see you for another lecture, but I'm sure I will see you all on Canvas. And feel free, if you loved this class and love psychology, feel free to join me for something like research methods or abnormal psych or human sexuality if you're interested.